Let's watch this crazy stuff. A man was arrested for putting on his helmet. Let's watch.
Including his helmet. It should also be noted that Mr. Fendler was listening to music through Bluetooth headphones inside his helmet. Shortly after entering the store, Mr. Fendler was briefly approached by one of the managers, but Mr. Fendler fails to acknowledge their presence and continues walking. The manager stalls for a moment, and approximately 1 minute later, he approaches Mr. Fendler from behind, but he is ignored again. Mr. Fendler continued shopping for another 10 minutes, and after checking out and stopping at a bench inside the store to organize his backpack, he was confronted by several officers of the Sahuarita Police Department.
Hey, bud, you got some ID on you? Hey.
Hey!
You have some ID on you? Hold on, man. What's up? You have some ID on you? Sure.
That is crazy, no?
No problem? Yeah, management's been asking you to take your helmet off while you're walking around in the store and you're just ignoring them. What are you talking about, man? You think I'm talking just to
Dude, do me a favor, take your helmet off. You're not going to speak with us with your helmet on.
Okay.
At this point, the officers have initiated an investigatory detainment, and Mr. Fendler surrenders his identification without question or protest. The legality of wearing a helmet inside Walmart is irrelevant. The real issue at hand is whether the officers have reasonable suspicion to believe that Mr. Fendler is trespassing, and given that the manager who called 911 said that they had asked Mr. Fendler to leave several times, it is likely that the officers would be within their authority to detain and investigate him. As with many states, citizens in Arizona are required to state their name if a police officer suspects them of committing a crime under Arizona Revised Statute 13-2412, and Mr. Fendler would have been required to state his name if he hadn't peacefully surrendered his ID. It is important to note that Mr. Fendler is detained because this is when his Fourth Amendment protections come into play. The Supreme Court has dedicated many rulings to developing a legal framework that distinguishes between lawful and unlawful arrests, and over the years, the precedent has become more formalized and developed. In the 1968 case of Terry versus Ohio, the Supreme Court noted that, quote, not all personal intercourse between policemen and citizens involves seizures of persons, and that, quote, only when the officer, by means of physical force or show of authority, has in some way restrained the liberty of a citizen, may we conclude that a seizure has occurred. In the decades between the Terry ruling and the 1991 case of Florida versus Bostick, the reasonable suspicion standard underwent many changes and eventually evolved into a reasonable perception approach. In the Bostick case, the court held that the appropriate inquiry to determine whether a citizen has been seized is, quote, whether a reasonable person would feel free to decline the officer's requests or otherwise terminate the encounter. Given that Mr. Fendler was surrounded by officers and was ordered to present his identification and remove his helmet, it is likely that a court would consider him detained and entitled to constitutional protection.
Take your helmet off. Oh. Music playing.
I'm sorry?
Oh, man. I have music playing, so if someone's trying to talk to me, I probably can't hear them. But if you're put a record, I wouldn't try to talk to you.
Well, did you make a purchase?
Yeah. I
You have a
bought
receipt with you?
Dropping everything, man. Yeah, yeah.
So he said that he had music playing in his helmet.
I walked right up to just like I'm talking to you right now. Stood right there.
Okay.
No, updated with MVD? Yes, it is. I live in a model.
Okay.
So did you see the manager basically walk up right to your face and ask you to take off your helmet? How'd you not see that?
I saw him talking, but he's got a headset on.
I'm standing
so.
right next to you. Right next to you. I came up and I said, sir,
I thought
need
you were
to
going
stop.
this way. I didn't hear
I
you.
said, stop. I followed you halfway throughout the store.
I have discussed the efficacy of eyewitness testimony in a previous episode, which I will link in the info card above, so I won't spend too much time on it in this episode. But it should be noted that witnesses can be extremely unreliable, and the manager's recollection of events is a testament to that. First, the manager claims that he walked right up to Mr. Fendler and implied that Mr. Fendler intentionally ignored him. As you can see from the surveillance footage, the manager makes a subtle gesture at Mr. Fendler, but remains outside of his field of view for the majority of the encounter. It is easy to see how Mr. Fendler may have been unaware that the manager was trying to speak to him, considering that he was wearing headphones and his view was restricted by the helmet. Next, the manager claims that he followed Mr. Fendler halfway through the store, telling him to stop. But once again, the cameras show that this statement is inaccurate. Although the manager did follow Mr. Fendler across the store, he approached Mr. Fendler from behind the second time and gave up after being ignored again. The manager implied that there was no way Mr. Fendler could have missed him, even with the headphones on. But the camera footage shows that it is entirely possible that Mr. Fendler was unaware of the manager's presence. Without questioning any other witnesses, reviewing any security footage, or getting Mr. Fendler's side of the story, the officers began their questioning by assuming the manager was being truthful. The officers also allowed the manager to interrogate Mr. Fendler in the midst of their investigation, which only added to the escalation of the interaction. Mr. Fendler continues to answer questions, and for a moment it seems as though he may get the opportunity to explain himself.
Let me ask you something. What's the purpose of keeping the helmet on?
It's just faster to get to work, man. Like I said, I'm on my way to work.
Where do you work at?
Work at Jim Click, right
Okay.
there.
So you walk through the store. What'd you buy?
I bought a sandwich, a Gatorade, 2 peaches, a scrubber, I think 4 pens, and a toothbrush.
Okay.
That's it.
So you just kept.
Everything on here.
That's it.
I couldn't
So
find
you
a basket.
keep the helmet on. You walk around.
Yeah, I do that.
grab
at
all
the
this
Safeway,
stuff.
I go to the other Safeway. I go Fry's. Except for when I go to the bank.
I mean, he knows I know because I ride. He rides.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't take much effort to take it off, put it back on. I mean, it takes maybe like 5 seconds, 10 seconds,
It
if that.
doesn't, man. But I've never had any issues where anyone's like taking